Thank you very much. I have a presentation to share with you. It's wonderful to be reunited with Secretary Chertoff. In our time under the Bush administration, I worked for both Condoleezza Rice and General Powell. I was recruited out of the private sector to set up the teams that followed bin Laden's financing. And we fight the fight here, and thanks to Congressman Pittenger, the forum has really been focusing on financial intelligence. But today I'm going to actually be talking about other threats that we're looking at. So if we start and take a look and think about the world we're living in, we're actually the beneficiaries of globalization, right? In terms of post-Cold War, post the fall of the Berlin Wall, just the fact that we're all physically here together, we as global citizens have the access to goods, services, information, the physical movement, faster, better, and cheaper. But what I study at the National Defense University is the dark side of globalization. And unfortunately, we've seen not just illicit networks in the form of criminals, terrorists, insurgents, and their facilitators, but now authoritarian regimes such as China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, who are marrying up their efforts with illicit actors. They're almost their proxies, and that's what we're starting to see. What I've been looking at for several years is really what we call the convergence of terror groups and criminal groups. In the past, terrorist groups are focused on political agendas, religious objectives, but they were also auto-financed, mostly by state sponsors. We have the example now of Iran that is sponsoring Hamas and Hezbollah. But as things changed, a lot of these terror groups started to delve into criminal activities. And this is where you've seen terrorist groups start to exploit all types of illicit trafficking, including human trafficking. And then criminal groups like the Mexican cartels adopt terrorist tactics like the beheadings that you've seen. And unfortunately, we've seen these groups get stronger, and they use the same facilitators. During the course of the forum, the next 2 days, you're going to be seeing the exploitation of emerging technologies and financial mechanisms. And those are the facilitators that we're looking at. But let's take a look at a couple of the examples that we have around the world. Perhaps the most vivid one is the evolution of ISIS, as we saw. It was born of al-Qaeda, and many actually argue because of the US withdrawal in 2011, we actually allowed the growth and expansion of ISIS. We also have other examples, such as we have in the world, the Taliban are back in Afghanistan. I know we have Afghan delegates who are here with us today. And then in Africa, we can't forget that Boko Haram in Nigeria exploits human slavery as a way to sustain themselves. I focus mostly on Latin America. So for many decades, I've been looking at narco-terrorism, how groups like the FARC, the ELN, and I think we have some Peruvian representatives like Shining Path, have really become more drug traffickers than terror groups, but have allowed them to last decades. And then the area that we're going to focus on is Hezbollah in the Americas. So what did we see? October 7th became the 9/11. It's sad, and I think Secretary Chertoff shares my bewilderment that so many people have forgotten about 9/11. I also teach at Georgetown and George Washington University, where my students were not even born on September 11th, 2001. This is why we need to re-educate a lot of our students as to what these terrorists want, and more importantly, that they're the enemy of human rights, and more importantly, democracy. September 11th and now October 7th, we've actually seen the evolution of these terror groups that have become much more sophisticated, relying on emerging technologies. And you know, I think you would agree with me, we underestimated Hamas. We thought they were primitive, living in, just like we thought bin Laden was in a cave. We underestimated Hamas plotting in the tunnels and going off grid. They knew that we were surveilling them with all types of technology, and that's why they didn't use these different phones that we all are so reliant on. But let's take at the issue of the day. What we've seen earlier today, all the senators have alluded to this migration crisis. And it's not just happening in the Western Hemisphere, it's happening around the world. The majority of migrants are seeking a better life for their family, and they are economic migrants. My parents themselves, I'm from the Philippines originally, my parents came as a lawyer and a doctor in the 1960s, and I was born here in the United States. But they went through legal paths of migration. So I just want to declare that migration is a positive thing. It's what the United States was born out of, but there are paths to migration that are legal, in contrast to what we're seeing, which is weaponized migration. We're also seeing something very disturbing here in the United States that was alluded to by the senators. As we have this insecurity of our southern border, not just migrants are crossing, but huge amounts of a very deadly drug that is about to arrive in your countries called fentanyl. It is 50 times more potent than heroin. It's the #1 cause of death of young people in the United States, age 18 to 45. Every day, 300 Americans are being poisoned by this drug that comes from China. It's processed by the Mexican cartels. And just to give you the sign and more importantly, the indication of how lucrative it is, it costs in a laboratory in Mexico about 20 cents to make a pill that is laced with fentanyl. And it's sold on the streets near our baseball stadium here between $10 to $20. There is no other product in the world that is as profitable as fentanyl. And I just came back from Colombia. We're starting to see the spread of fentanyl throughout Latin America, and there are already indications that it's arrived in Amsterdam and Portugal. But let's get back to the topic of migration. It was great to see the video. Thank you, Joseph. We've actually done a lot of research together. And there is one choke point that we're really looking at, which is the Darien Gap. Historically, the Darien Gap was so difficult to traverse, even from the days of the colonialization of Latin America. It was a natural barrier. Now, if you take a look at drone footage that U.S. Southern Command takes, there are actual paths because of the number of migrants that have taken this very treacherous trip in order to arrive destination United States. We were just there earlier this year. It is the United Nations. There are more than 100 nationalities that are represented there. And more importantly, it is the key route that these migrants are taking by foot in order to go northbound. What we did see was actually some great cooperation in terms of trying to gather the biometrics. But what was very disturbing, we saw many migrants who were coming from what we call category countries, special interest aliens. Iranians, Belarusians. We had lots of Africans, Somalis, Sudanese, and Lebanese. What we're starting to see then, too, is not just the volume, but the mix. Very disturbing this year is the number of Chinese, single, male, able-bodied that are crossing the southern border into the United States, among all the rest. The numbers that we're working with now, yesterday was a record banner day. It was the highest number of encounters with migrants by the Customs and Border Patrol at 12,000. The normal capacity is 1,000 to 2,000 to process all of these people. There are some of the interviews that we've had is they anticipate a change in government next year, that they will be much more strict about closing the border. That's why we anticipate between now and the election, even more migrants coming from all over the world. But what are we really looking at? I still have my counterterrorism hat on, Secretary Chertoff. We've always worried, and that was the basis of Homeland Security and putting Border Patrol, Customs, and Immigration under the auspices of Homeland Security, the fear that terrorists would cross the border from the north and from the south in terms of coming across. 169 individuals who are on the terror watch list have been intercepted. But I worry about who's not been intercepted. These are what we call the ones who got caught. And we also know that the number of gotaways is huge because what's happening is the border agents have to deal with people first, and then more importantly, you can't cover the entire border. So that's how we know the gotaways are there from surveillance. We can see them crossing, but it's not enough time to get them intercepted. And at the same time, what's coming with them? The drugs that are poisoning our population. We still are very worried about foreign fighters. ISIS might be gone as a caliphate, but the digital caliphate exists. So we distinguish between those who are foreign fighters who left and went to fight alongside and are coming back, including over 250 US citizens. But more importantly, the question is, are they still faithful to jihad? And we actually have had, just this week, there was a plot of a 16-year-old inspired by ISIS who was caught in Las Vegas. So it still exists. The bigger question is, are we detecting them? And then there's actually the case of in Trinidad and Tobago in 2018, there were ISIS foreign fighters who came back. They were going to attack Carnival. For those who don't know, Carnival is a major event in Trinidad and Tobago, and it would have actually physically attacked the grandstand where the entire heads of government would have been. It would have decapitated physically the government. So it's a persistent threat. But let's take a look at the threat of Hezbollah in Latin America. I've been following this for about 20 years, but more importantly, they rely on the diaspora. So just to put the facts out and to make my lawyers at the Department of Defense happy, the diaspora of the Lebanese, the majority are actually Christians. Who we're interested in are the Muslim Shia who support the militant wing of Hezbollah, just to put it out there. They're quite present throughout Latin America. Most of the time, every time there's a conflict, we've seen that there have been people who leave, obviously, conflict zones, and that's how we had the largest waves. Very prominent Lebanese Latin Americans include Carlos Slim, the richest man in Mexico, and Shakira. Perhaps you guys know who she is, that singer. But what we're looking at now is how they exploit illicit networks, such as terrorist financing, drug trafficking, specifically cocaine, and then more importantly, they really look at fragile states where they operate, particularly in the tri-border of Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil. And on about a month ago, they actually uncovered this plot. So with the help of the Mossad, the Brazilian police were able to detain 3 what we think are Lebanese Hezbollah operatives who've been traveling between Brazil and Lebanon, and they were targeting, again, Jewish community targets, similar to the 1992 and 1994 attacks in Argentina. What we're trying to do now is create, and I call on those of you who are parliamentarians, really the incorporation of what are these global watch lists that will help prevent terror travel. On the day that this operation took place, we were in Chile, the Global Counterterrorism Forum, meeting about how to implement these types of watch lists. So this is what we're looking at. Something that's very disturbing and emerging is now the exploitation of social media, but more importantly, emerging technologies, how these groups are recruiting, how these groups are setting up cyber physical markets for human trafficking and for drug trafficking, and then more importantly, the propaganda piece. And I share Secretary Kirchhoff's concern. How do you maintain your right to expression, but at the same time, you protect our right to actual security? And this is a major issue, and many of the laws are pending in your parliaments as well as Congress as to how to regulate social media, the advent of AI, as well as all the different types of technology that we're incorporating. And just to finish up, you're here, and welcome to Washington, D.C. What we're looking at now is how can we improve the fight against terrorism and crime at the multilateral level and really make those institutions at the United Nations, as well as at NATO, European Union, the OAS, really have teeth. Because this threat, particularly of terrorism, has come back to bite us. And I think many of us have forgotten and become complacent over the past 20 years. So we'll see in terms of, as you are here in Washington, you will notice that the threat level is raised. The FBI director is very concerned. We have not seen this level of concern, and more importantly, the warnings. You'll notice when you travel around Washington, even in the metro and as at the airports, it'll take more time to get through. I'm from New York City, so we always talked about see something, say something, and only recently have we seen the posters of see something, say something repopulate the metro and the buses. But I think as we are lovers of freedom and our human rights, we need to remain ever vigilant and think about how we can counter terrorism and crime, but at the same time respect all of our rights of expression, but more importantly, be very aware of how these groups are very tenacious, and they have not forgotten 9/11 or now October 7th. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank each of you.